So each evening during this retreat, we begin with chanting the refuges and the precepts. So I hope you have your chant sheet. If you don't already know them well enough, I hope you have that with you. And we'll be chanting them in Pali. And you have to stay muted. So you'll chant them with yourself and with me. You'll hear me. I'd love to chant with you out loud, but we wouldn't be able to stand the sound. It's not the refuges and precepts we wouldn't be able to stand the sound of. It's the chaos of sound on Zoom with a group. I don't do them as call and response. We'll just do them straight through and fairly slowly so that those of you who aren't as familiar will be able to keep up with us. Is there anybody that is planning or is already practicing in this retreat with 8 precepts? To experiment, if you will, practicing with 8 precepts, if you'd like to try that for a day or 2 or the rest of the retreat, a few days, and just see what that's like. You're very welcome to explore that. So because there is one person who is doing it, we will chant the 8 precepts, and others of you are welcome to explore that aspect of practice if you'd like to. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Panatipata veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Abrahmacharya veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Musawada veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Vikala bojana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Nacha Gita, Wadita, Visukadasana, Malaganda, Vilepana, Dharana, Mandana, Vipusanathana, Veramni, Sikapadam, Samadhi Ami, Uchasayana, Mahasayana, Veramni, Sikapadam, Samadhi Ami. And everybody can say this, chant this last. Idam me silam, maga palanyanasa, pachayo otu. So the title of this evening's Dhamma reflection or Dhamma talk is Metta, the heart's release. And beginning with some words from the Buddha. It is in this way we must train ourselves, by liberation of the self. Through love, we will develop love. We will practice it. We will make it both a way and a basis. Take our stand upon it, store it up, and thoroughly set it going. The Buddha, Dhamma, the teachings and the practices are about transforming the heart, transforming the mind. So this evening we'll consider one of the important teachings and practices of this transformation, classically called a Brahmavihara, divine abiding in English. The radiant warmth and openness of metta, unconditional loving kindness and acceptance, unconditional friendship, the experience of connection and appreciation that in fact isn't fraught with any clinging, attachment, and not necessarily even with a sense of obligation. This unconditional quality of mind and heart arises quite naturally when our mindful attention penetrates the layer of conditioning that shuts us down to others. It's also important to recognize that this capacity of metta is present when concentration and mindfulness are able to begin penetrating the layers of conditioning that keep one from connecting with one's own bodily and mental experience with clarity and with kindness. And a quote from Nelson Mandela from South Africa. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or her background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So beginning with an old story, it's said that the Buddha first taught metta to a group of 500 monks who went into a particular and seemingly very congenial forest for their 3-month rainy season retreat. The forest was adjacent to a village of very strong supporters who were such strong supporters of these monks and the Buddhist teachings that they offered to build 500 huts for the monks to stay in during their rains retreat. And they were also happy to keep the monks' alms bowls filled during their 3-month practice period. And so the monks moved in and they began practicing vipassana, insight meditation. It's said that the unseen beings, the forest dwelling devas who lived there, became fearful of the monks, and they actually began to feel quite put out of their home when they saw that the monks weren't just visiting the forest for a day or two. So these forest dwelling beings began to create all sorts of frightening sounds and sights, and to emit some very, very distasteful odors, hoping that this would make the monks leave what they considered to be their forest. Well, soon enough, the monks became quite terrified. This broke their samadhi, this broke their concentration, and it definitely disrupted their mindfulness. Some of them even developed fever and pain and dizziness in conjunction with the fear that they were experiencing. And all of them felt it was really impossible, just impossible to continue practicing where they were. So they went to where the Buddha was staying and they related their tale. And the Buddha responded. He said, "My beloved monks, go back to exactly that same forest and practice your meditation there." Well, these monks responded to the Buddha's words by pleading that they not be sent back to that same forest again, saying it was really impossible to practice there. And the Buddha's response to this was, "Dear monks, because you went there to practice meditation without a weapon of protection, you've encouraged many distractions and difficulties. This time, however, I will give you a true weapon of protection." It's said that it was at this point that the Buddha offered them the metta teaching and practice. Well, out of their great respect for the Buddha, the monks didn't dare contradict his wishes. So, armed with the metta teaching and practice, they went back to that same forest. And for a while, they continued to experience feelings of fear and anxiety, while at the same time, they very diligently and virtuously and respectfully practiced metta. Well, soon enough, there were no more fearful sights or sounds. And whereas the devas had previously been hostile towards the monks, their anger and resentment disappeared when they began to feel the monks' metta. And in fact, feelings of respect and welcome and even reverence began to be the devas' experience, along with a sense of feeling connected, like with family. And the inclination arose in these devas to provide an environment of safety, to protect the monks from particular dangers that might be lurking in the forest so that they could practice their meditation peacefully. After recovering, strengthening, and deepening their concentration and open-hearted presence through practicing metta so diligently, it's said that all 500 monks at some point began practicing vipassana meditation again with metta as their foundation. And it's said that because they were able to practice meditation calmly and peacefully, that every single one of them became arhants, became fully enlightened beings during that rainy season retreat. So I'd like to read you the Metta Sutta. It's a short and very beautiful teaching from the Buddha. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upward to the skies and downward to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world, meaning not born again into the world of suffering. The great strength of a mind, of a heart, protected through the energy of metta. This quality, this capacity to stay present and connect with a heart that's fearless, with a mind and a heart that's really free of ill will. Gandhi called it the most powerful and the most subtle force in the universe. Metta is the energy that allows for and brings connection. It's the energy that keeps it all together. And this capacity is called for again and again and again throughout our practice, throughout our life. The practice and energetic experience of metta is offered and is felt as a natural, heartfelt wish towards oneself, as we've been doing today, another particular person, and various groups of beings. Wishing one's self and others to be happy, to be at ease, to be safe and secure, to be at peace. In the process of developing, expanding, and deepening this energy of the heart, one of the things that we begin to taste is that our own wants, our own preferences begin to pale. Now, of course, they are important on one level, on a number of levels, but with this incredible radiant energy of warmth that begins to flow from our heart in the process of cultivating unconditional friendship and acceptance, unconditional kindness and love, our personal wants and preferences begin to lose their usual intensity of almost always being very front and center. Sometimes my experience of metta, my experience of human kindness is like the sunshine, that warmth of the sun that permeates our outer and our inner sense of being. We could say that the practice of loving kindness is akin to letting the sunshine warm our heart, letting it warm our whole being, and then at some point radiating this quality out to the world around us. So, where does this capacity to connect, to cultivate, to live with unconditional friendship, unconditional acceptance, and kindness, where does it come from? It comes from our own experience of kindness, the experience of receiving kindness from others. It comes from our own experience of receiving warmth, of receiving love that's been given to us freely from another. If you had never experienced this unconditional kindness, you would have an extremely difficult time with this practice. But really, such people are very, very rare. In fact, I dare say we can't live very long without at least a little bit of unconditional care and kindness given to us. And every single one of us here in this retreat together has experienced at least some kindness given to us, some love, some warmth given to us freely. So one of my favorite examples, a very ordinary experience. Just before this retreat began, 2 days before, I went to the post office, as I do every couple days, to pick up my mail because they don't deliver mail to homes here in Taos. And as I walked into the post office to pick up my mail, or was about to walk in, someone opened the door for me and held the door open for me. I didn't know this person. I'd never seen them before. We looked at each other. We both had masks on. You can't go into the Taos post office without a mask on. And we smiled behind our masks. And I felt, and I think the other person did too, because I could see the smile in the other person's eyes. We felt a warm connection between us. That's metta. That's unconditional kindness being offered freely. And each of us, of course, have experienced kindness with people that we know and people that we're close to. Very likely kindness with a more overt and stronger energy than what I experienced in the post office the other day. So this is where the seeds come from. These are the seeds that are planted in us. These are the seeds that we cultivate. The kindness that we've been given is the kindness that we grow. That we grow, that we water and fertilize, that we cultivate by giving metta to ourselves and through offering it out to others. It's a circle. It's like a transmission. We've been given the transmission through the kindness offered to us from others. And we grow it like we're doing this week. We cultivate it and then we give it out. In the process of growing it, we give it out, which helps it grow even more. We offer the transmission back out again and again and again. It's this essential and really beautiful circle. the kindness that we receive and the kindness that we give, it's always a gift. Every instance of unconditional loving kindness given to us involves people giving us their time, their care, their support, or in some way, their help. And it's a very natural choice that others make and that we make. And it has an effect on us. And it has an effect on others. Jeffrey Hopkins, who is one of the Dalai Lama's interpreters, said this. He said, during a lecture while I was interpreting for the Dalai Lama, he said, in what seemed to me broken English, kindness is society. I wasn't smart enough to think he was saying kindness is society. I thought he meant kindness is important to society. Kindness is vital to society. But he was saying that kindness is so important that we cannot have society without it. Society is impossible without it. Thus, kindness is society. Society is kindness. Without concern for others, it's impossible to have society. Metta is really the ground, it's the bed, so to say, that all of the other immeasurable capacities of heart spring from. The other three divine abidings. Compassion, karuna in Pali, appreciative or empathetic joy, mudita in Pali, and equanimity, upekkha in Pali. It's also the capacity of heart and mind that allows the whole breadth of our meditation practice to unfold. Metta is what engenders the qualities of open-heartedness, acceptance, kindness, and patience, with each and all of these qualities being an essential ground for us throughout the whole of our practice, the whole process and practice of liberation. When I was in China in 1986, I found out that the contemporary Chinese written character for love was developed out of two ancient pictographs or symbols. The top symbol was a very simple one representing a person breathing, a symbol for breath. And the bottom symbol was one for the heart. So, based in ancient Chinese pictographic writing, the character for metta love is breath through the heart. With the cultivation of metta, we're moving towards, or we're inviting the opening, the expansion of the heart, the mind. And continuing with the metaphor of breath, metta is like the experience of breath moving through us. It's intangible, it's boundless, empty. Where from, where to? And yet it's a very powerful energy that moves within us and from us. So what is it? In the texts, it's often spoken of as non-ill will, the absence of ill will in relationship to ourself, meaning the absence of ill will in relationship to all of the phenomena of our body and mind, however they're manifesting from moment to moment to moment, and the absence of ill will towards others. So no aversion in any direction, meaning no For instance, comparing ourselves in relationship to others. No comparison, no conceit, no pride, no self-depreciation, no self-judgment, and no judgment or depreciation of others. So again, the absence of ill will in all directions. Here in this retreat, even in this online Zoom retreat, how often might we think maybe the person next to us on the screen or the person on the other side of the screen, how often might we think that, oh, their practice is just so much better than mine? Or maybe the comparing mind says, well, this person isn't practicing nearly as well as I am. These judgments, felt judgments, they're better than me, or I'm no good, or I'm great, no sleepiness, no movement. Just look at that person nodding away, restless, moving around. Well, obviously, this is not metta. We're creating a separation, me, other. The heart, the mind is contracted. And if we're really paying attention, it's quite uncomfortable. So we mindfully recognize and acknowledge that this too is part of our practice. And we learn that one way to attend to the suffering of separation, to the ache of self-centeredness, is to offer oneself metta. And also to offer the other person in the equation metta. One of the most striking aspects of metta, and maybe for some of you surprisingly so, is that metta is impersonal in nature. Even in relationship to what we think of as our self, what we're identified with and attached to either in a positive way or in a critical way as our self. Our body, our thoughts, ideas, opinions, skills, our knowledge. Metta is impersonal in nature in relationship to other beings as well. A heart, mind filled with metta has the capacity to impartially embrace all beings. Not only those we're close to in our lives, those who are easy to care about, or those who maybe are useful or amusing or pleasing to us. A heart, mind filled with metta holds the possibility of a capacity for what can be called immeasurable impartiality. This capacity of being able to connect and care for any being, to connect and care for all beings. And some words from the great Indian meditation teacher Krishnamurti, from his meditation journal. Meditation is one of the most extraordinary things, he said. It's not an intellectual affair, but when the mind enters into the heart, the mind has quite a different quality. It's really then limitless. It's a sense of living in a vast space where you are part of everything. Meditation is the movement of love. It isn't the love of the one or of the many. It's like water that anyone can drink out of any jar, whether golden or earthenware. It's inexhaustible, and you must begin without knowing anything about it and move from innocence to innocence. The mind, the heart of metta connects and accepts. It's non-critical, non-judgmental. Metta has no interest in comparing or fixing. It senses, sees, and knows things to be just as they are. Within the process of our practice, we're developing an inner sense of well-being and patience and acceptance. Metta and aversion actually can't exist simultaneously. As you're practicing today and will be ongoing through this retreat in the very specific ways that each of you are cultivating a concentrated clarity of attention and working with the practice of metta in relationship to its purifying and healing aspects. With this, you're also learning that metta practice aids this development of our capacity for a clear, deep, and strong, concentrated, mindful attention. As our capacity for metta grows and blossoms, there's an unwinding and unbinding of the heart and mind from states of fear, states of anger, judgment, states of separation and disconnection. These strong afflictive energies that move through our mind, heart, and body begin to unwind, to weaken, to fade, and even eventually to potentially dissolve under the strong medicine of the heart of metta, concentration, and mindfulness. Someone once asked the great Indian spiritual teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj, he actually taught through dialogue with his students. Someone once asked him, "What is love?" And his response was, "When the sense of distinction and separation is absent, you may call it love." And then the student said, "What can make me love?" And Nisargadatta responded, "You are love when you're not afraid. You are love when you're not afraid." The writer Dina Metzger said, "There are those who set fire to the world. We are in danger. There's no time to go slowly. There's no time not to love." And the Buddha said it perfectly. He said, "Hatred can never cease by hatred. Only through love alone can healing happen. This is a universal law." Last spring, when the COVID pandemic started to be part of all of our lives, I found this news report from Belfast, from Northern Ireland. And I'd like to share it with you. When you go out and see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, "It looks like the end of the world." What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our grandparents, our parents, our brothers and sisters, protecting people we may never meet. People will lose jobs over this. Some will lose their businesses and some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk or on your way to the store or just watching the news to look at the emptiness and marvel at all of that love. Let it fill you and sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It's the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness. If metta is the ground, the basis, and the impetus that our thoughts, words, and actions spring from, if our motivations and our intentions spring from the heart of metta, the karma that's created will be wholesome and healing, both personally and in ways far beyond our own small lives, even in ways that we may never ever know. So I'd like to now spend just a few moments exploring some expectations of what we might think the experience of metta is supposed to be. I think that many of us expect metta to be a feeling, some very familiar felt sense. And of course, our expectation is based on something that we're already familiar with. It's actually impossible to expect or to look for something that we don't know, at least to some degree, something that we have never ever experienced. Or to look for something that maybe we've experienced, in fact, but didn't label as unconditional loving kindness or unconditional friendship, metta. Sometimes metta manifests as a familiar felt sense. But we can get caught, we can get stuck in expecting this. It's actually limiting. Metta is not sentimental. It's not romantic. These are both totally conditional experiences. And metta isn't even necessarily always a particularly juicy feeling. The heart, the mind that's free from ill will, free from greed, fear, hatred, anger at any given moment is the mind of stillness, the heart of peacefulness. It's in the absence of greed, in the absence of aversion. It's in the abiding stillness and peace that metta arises. And it may not be a feeling we think of or are really familiar with as love. There's a great power and strength in the capacity to connect within ourselves and in relationship to others directly, clearly, patiently, and fearlessly, with a mind, a heart, free, really free of ill will. We could say that this is metta, this unfettered, unconditional connection. And I think, as you all know, as we all know, it's not so easy. There are many layers of conditioning that need to be seen or seen through and let go along the way of our practice. And I found over the years that the qualities of honesty and humility are really essential if practice is to continue to unfold, reaping its most amazing and freeing benefits. There's a beautiful story in the Anguttara Nikaya, the story of Sariputta's lion's roar, that demonstrates this really clearly. Sariputta was one of the Buddha's two chief disciples, and foremost in terms of discernment and wisdom next to the Buddha. The story takes place just after the completion of the 3-month rainy season retreat, and the monks were beginning to disperse for their various duties and responsibilities in other places after this 3-month retreat. So this is the sutta, Sariputta's Lion's Roar. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove at Metta-Upekkha's monastery. At that time, the Venerable Sariputta approached the Blessed One. Having paid homage to him, he sat down to one side and said, "Lord, I have completed the rains retreat at Savatthi, and I wish to leave for a country journey." And the Buddha responded, "Sariputta, you may go whenever you're ready." The Venerable Sariputta rose from his seat and bowed to the Buddha, keeping him to his right, and departed. Soon after the Venerable Sariputta had left, one monk spoke to the Buddha saying, "The Venerable Sariputta has hit me and has left on his journey without an apology." Right away, the Buddha called another monk and said, "Go, monk, go and call the Venerable Sariputta, saying, 'The master calls you, Sariputta.'" The monk did as he was bidden, and the Venerable Sariputta responded saying, "Yes, friend." Then the Venerable Mahamoggallana and the Venerable Ananda went around to all of the monks' lodgings and said, "Come, Reverend Sirs, come, for today the Venerable Sariputta will utter his lion's roar in the presence of the Blessed One." The Venerable Sariputta approached the Buddha and after bowing to him, sat down to one side. When he was seated, the Buddha said, "One of your fellow monks here has complained that you hit him and left on your journey without an apology." The Venerable Sariputta responded, "Lord, I remember the discourse you gave 12 years ago to Bhikkhu Rahula." Bhikkhu Rahula was the Buddha's son. "I remember the discourse you gave 12 years ago to Bhikkhu Rahula when he was 18 years old. You taught him to contemplate the nature of earth, water, fire, and air in order to nourish and develop the virtues of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Although your teaching was directed towards Rahula, I also learned from it. I have practiced and observed that teaching. Lord, I practice mindfulness and loving kindness. One who does not practice mindfulness of the body and the body, of the actions of the body and the actions of the body, and is not present, may well hit a fellow monk and leave without an apology. Lord, I have practiced like the earth. When people throw clean substances such as flowers, perfume, or fresh milk upon the earth, or foul, unclean substances like dung, urine, spittle, pus, and blood. Yet for all that, the earth has no revulsion, loathing, or disgust towards it. Even so, Lord, do I dwell with a heart that is like the earth, vast, exalted, and measureless, without hostility and without ill will. Lord, I have practiced mindfulness and loving kindness. One who does not practice mindfulness of the body and the body and is not present may well hit a fellow monk and leave without an apology. But it is not my way to be rude to a fellow monk, hit him, and walk on without apologizing. Lord, I have practiced like the water. People use water to wash things clean and unclean, things soiled with dung, urine, spittle, pus, and blood. Yet for all that, the water has no revulsion, loathing, or disgust towards it. Even so, Lord, do I dwell with a heart that is like water, vast, exalted, and measureless, without hostility and without ill will. A monk who does not practice mindfulness, who does not practice becoming like water, might hit a fellow monk and go on his way without saying, I'm sorry. I am not such a monk. Lord, I have practiced to be more like fire. Fire burns things pure and impure, the beautiful as well as the distasteful. And yet for all that, the fire has no revulsion, loathing, or disgust towards it. Even so, Lord, do I dwell with a heart like fire, vast, exalted, and measureless, without hostility and without ill will. A monk who does not practice mindfulness of seeing, hearing, thinking, might hit a fellow monk and go on without apologizing. Lord, I am not such a monk. Lord, I have practiced like the air. The air blows on things clean and unclean and carries all smells, pleasing and unpleasing. And yet for all that, the air has no revulsion, loathing, or disgust towards it. Even so, Lord, do I dwell with a heart that is like the air, vast, exalted, and measureless, without hostility and without ill will. Lord, I have practiced mindfulness of the body in the body, the movement of the body in the movement of the body, the positions of the body in the positions of the body, the feelings in the feelings, and the mind in the mind. One who does not practice mindfulness might hit a fellow monk and go on without apologizing. I am not such a monk. Lord, just as an untouchable boy or girl, begging vessel in hand and clad in rags, enters a village with a humble heart, even so, Lord, do I dwell with a heart that is humble, vast, exalted, and measureless, without hostility, without ill will. I have practiced and learned every day. A monk who does not practice loving kindness and mindfulness might hit a fellow monk and go on without apologizing. Lord, I am not such a monk. Sariputta continued to deliver his lion's roar. At one point, the accusing monk rose from his seat, arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, and with his head on the ground, bowed at the feet of the Buddha, saying, Lord, I committed an offense when I was so foolish, jealous, angry, and unskillful. I accuse the Venerable Sariputta falsely, wrongly, untruthfully. Let the Blessed One and the Sangha accept my admission of the offense and pardon me, and I shall practice restraint in the future. And the Buddha responded, truly, monk, you committed an offense when you were so foolish, jealous, angry, and unskillful that you accused Sariputta falsely, wrongly, and untruthfully. But as you have recognized your offense and make amends, we pardon you. It's a sign of growth when one recognizes one's offense, makes amends, and in the future practices restraint. And then the Buddha turned to the Venerable Sariputta, saying, forgive this foolish man, Sariputta, before his head splits into 7 pieces on this very spot. The Buddha did have a sense of humor. We don't hear about it too often, but he did. And Sariputta responded, I shall forgive him, Lord, if this revered monk also asks for my pardon, as I may not have been skillful enough and created some misunderstanding, may he too forgive me. And then Sariputta and the accusing monk bowed 3 times to each other and reconciled. Metta is one of the very best medicines, a very powerful medicine. Our human heart is intuitively, naturally loving. Connection and kindness are really absolutely natural human capacities. And we often see this in the smallest children. Quite a few years ago now, I was feeding one of my granddaughters when she was 7 months old, giving her pieces of banana. She was sitting in her high chair. She took one of the pieces from me and put it in my mouth, with a huge smile erupting on her face as she proceeded to feed me. A totally innocent and pure expression of the heart of kindness. A while ago, I read a book that was about and by a 102-year-old African-American man whose name was George Dawson. He grew up on his family's farm in East Texas, and he was the grandson of slaves. At the age of 8, George had to go to work to help support his family, so he never attended school and never learned how to read until at the age of 98, he decided to attend a literacy program. And he learned how to read at the age of 98. And then he wrote a book about himself. It's an amazing, inspiring, and illuminating book. George describes how he learned to read the world and survive in it. So I'd like to share a little bit of this book for part of our reflection this evening. At one point, George is having a conversation with Richard. Richard's the man who helped George write the book. And they're talking together about George, who at the age of 101 was still living alone. And as George says, and doing just fine. Richard speaking. You're not really alone. People call and come by all day long. There's a community of people that care about you. You live by yourself, but no, you're not alone. George speaking. That's right. You figured that out. Yes, it's nice that people stop by like they do, but they do because they want to. I have nothing to give them, but they always feel better when they leave. Richard. That sounds like a riddle. George. It does, doesn't it? I'll tell you the answer for that. All my life, I've been good to people. In all those years, every person I met, I treated with respect. People do the same for me. Richard. What goes around comes around. George. That's right. It all comes back, everything you do. Sometimes it might take a while, that's all. I tell people not to worry about things, not to worry about their lives. Things will be all right. People need to hear that. Life is good as it is. There isn't anything I would change about my life. Richard. People worry too much? George. That's right. Be happy for what you have. Help somebody instead of worrying. It'll make a person feel better. It's good to be generous. It doesn't take much to make a difference. Even the poorest person can just take the time to say hello. That can be a help. Have some sympathy for someone's hard luck story. It's not about money. Give what you can. And if you have nothing, at least pray for somebody. Have good thoughts, said George. The cultivation, this is me talking now, not George. The cultivation, the practice of metta is metta itself. As an example of the stability and the beauty of a heart a mind that's steeped in kind-heartedness. I'd like to continue on just a little bit with our 102-year-old Bodhisattva, or Bodhisattva in Pali, or in Sanskrit, George Dawson. For much of his life, George endured a very pervasive racism and segregation in the South, growing up in East Texas. During the time that he grew up there, East Texas had the highest rate of lynchings of any state in the Union. And actually, this book begins with when George was 8 years old, as he witnessed the lynching of a teenage boy who was his hero. When George was 65, he was doing yard work for a woman who had left his lunch out on the back porch with her dogs. And here again is George speaking or writing. She didn't see me from the shadow of the tree, but I watched as she put down 2 bowls on the floor for some dogs, and another she set up on the shelf that was above the reach of the dogs. I climbed up on the porch and lifted the bowl off the shelf. It looked good, and as hungry as I was, it smelled even better. I was looking for a chair to sit in and a quiet spot to say grace, when I looked down and saw the dogs eating the same food that was there for me on the shelf. There wasn't much of a surprise in that. People didn't buy dog food in the sack like they do now. Dogs mostly ate the leftovers from the table. But what hit me was that she expected that I would eat out on the porch with the dogs. I didn't have to eat in their dining room, but back in their kitchen would have been all right. I told myself that I was good enough to eat a meal with people, not dogs. I set the bowl back on the shelf. Being hungry, that wasn't so easy. I know she didn't plan to insult me. She just didn't know better. Still, she could believe what she wanted, but I wasn't an animal. I wasn't going to eat with the dogs. If I did, she would go on believing that way. And maybe she would have been right. Late in the afternoon, she came by. Didn't you see the lunch I left on the porch? I nodded. I saw the dogs on the porch. Well, the lunch on the shelf was for you. It was a good lunch. Thank you. I'm sure it was. It's just that I don't eat with dogs. As I said that, I looked her straight in the eye. I could tell she understood what I meant. She got angry and red in the face. But I didn't turn away. I didn't look down. I eat with people. I'm a human being. At my words, her face tightened and her look changed to meanness and anger. From her mother and father and back through her grandparents, I could see 100 years of anger and fear coming out towards me. I stood up to it and repeated, I'm a human being. She was so angry she couldn't speak. I waited, and finally in a cold tone, she said, you don't need to come back here anymore. And I said, that's right, I don't need to. And George goes on to say, I figure you can't hate someone for what they think and do. But you can hate yourself for the unacceptable ways you react to it. In the transformation, the opening into the greatness of heart, there's a great letting go, a release, a relinquishment of much of what we've held on to, much of what we've grasped very tightly. There's a great release of the contractions of the heart, the past pains, the hurts, the anguish that we've taken in and taken on as mine, as me, as I am. And it's not so easy to relinquish this. this conditioning, these habituated patterns of our self. But this is what binds the heart. This is what binds the mind. Our commitment to our practice, our willingness to take the journey is what affords the transformation. And it's certainly not so easy at times, but it's very, very well worth it. There's a tremendous fullness of energy that's constituted by great confidence and strength and a very clear straightforwardness that comes from a loving heart, that comes from the heart of metta. So in closing the Dhamma reflection this evening, I'd like to share a story with you about a young Native American woman named Sue Ann Marie Big Crow. Sue Ann was born on March 15th in 1974 on the Pine Ridge Reservation. She grew up with her sisters on the reservation in her mother's 3-bedroom house. Sue Ann's mother, Chick Big Crow, was known to be quite a strict mother. Her daughters always had to be in the house or the yard by the time the streetlights came on. The only after-school activities she let them take part in were the structured and chaperoned kinds. Unsupervised wandering and later cruising around in cars were totally out. Sue Ann said that she and her sisters had to come up with their own fun because their mother wouldn't let them socialize outside of school. Chick Big Crow was strongly anti-drug and alcohol, belonging to the small but adamant minority on the reservation that takes this stance. When Sue Ann was 9 years old, she was staying with her godmother on New Year's Eve when the woman's teenage son came home drunk and shot himself in the chest. The woman was too distraught to do anything, so Sue Ann called the ambulance and the police and cared for her godmother until other grown-ups arrived. Perhaps because of this incident, Sue Ann became as opposed to drug and alcohol as her mother was. She gave talks on the subject to school and youth groups and even made a video urging her message. Raul Bradford, a former Pine Ridge teacher and coach who was also a good friend of the Big Crow family, was once asked whether Sue Ann's public advocacy on this issue wasn't risky, given the prominence of alcohol in the life of the reservation. You have to understand, Raul said, Sue Ann didn't respond to peer pressure. Sue Ann was peer pressure. She was the backbone of any group she was in, and she was way wiser than her years. As strongly as Sue Ann's mother forbade certain activities, she encouraged her daughter in sports. At one time or another, they did all of them: cross-country, running and track, volleyball, cheerleading, softball, basketball. When Sue Ann was in the 5th grade, she heard somewhere that to improve your dribbling, you should bounce a basketball 1,000 times a day with each hand. She performed this daily exercise faithfully on the cement floor of the patio, her mother and her sisters getting very, very tired of the sound. So for variety, she would shoot layups against the gutter and the drain pipe until they came loose from the house and had to be repaired. Some people who live in cities and towns near Indian reservations treat their Indian neighbors decently, and some don't. Some people in South Dakota hate Indians unapologetically and will tell you why. And in their voices, you can hear a particular American meanness that's centuries old. When teams from Pine Ridge play non-Indian teams, the question of race is always there. When Pine Ridge is the visiting team, usually the hosts are courteous and the players and fans have a good time. But Pine Ridge coaches know that occasionally at away games, their kids will be insulted, their fans will feel unwelcome. The host gym can be dense with hostility, and the referees can call fouls on Indian players every chance they get. Sometimes in a game between Indian and non-Indian teams, the difference in race becomes an important and distracting part of the event. One place where Pine Ridge teams used to get harassed at times was the high school gymnasium in Lead, South Dakota. In the fall of 1988, the Pine Ridge Lady Thorpes went to Lead to play a basketball game. Sue Ann was a full member of the team by then. She was a freshman, 14 years old. And getting ready in the locker room, the Pine Ridge girls could hear the din from the Lead fans. They were yelling fake Indian war cries. The usual plan for the pregame warm-up was for the visiting team to run onto the court in a line, take a lap or two around the floor, shoot some baskets, and then go to their bench at courtside. And then after that, the home team would come out and do the same thing. And then the game would begin. Usually the Lady Thorpes lined up for their entry more or less according to height, which meant that the senior, Donnie DeCory, who was one of the tallest, went first. As the team waited in the hallway leading from the locker room, the heckling got louder. Some fans were waving food stamps, a reference to the reservations receiving federal aid. Others yelled, "Where's the cheese?" The joke being that if Indians were lining up, it must be to get commodity cheese. The Lead high school band had joined in with fake Indian drumming and a fake Indian tune. Donnie DeCory looked out the door and told her teammates, "I can't handle this." Sue Ann quickly offered to go first in her place. She was so eager that Donnie became suspicious. "Don't embarrass us," Donnie told her. Sue Ann said, I won't embarrass you." So Donnie gave her the ball, and Sue Ann stood first in line. She came running out onto the court, dribbling the basketball, with her teammates running behind. And on the court, the noise was deafening. Sue Ann went right down the middle and suddenly stopped when she got to center court. Her teammates were taken by surprise, and some of them bumped into each other. Sue Ann turned to Donnie DeCory and tossed her the ball. Then she stepped into the jump ball circle at center court, facing the Lead fans. She unbuttoned her warm-up jacket, took it off, and draped it over her shoulders, and began to do the Lakota shawl dance. Sue Ann knew all the traditional dances. She had competed in many powwows as a little girl, and the dance she chose was a young woman's dance, graceful and modest and show-offy, all at the same time. I couldn't believe it. She was powwowing like get down, Donnie DeCory recalled. And then Sue Ann started to sing, and she began to sing in Lakota, swaying back and forth in the jump ball circle, doing the shawl dance and using her warm-up jacket for a shawl. The crowd went completely silent. All that stuff the Lead fans were yelling, it was like she reversed it somehow, a teammate said. In the sudden quiet, all they could hear was her Lakota song. Then Sue Ann dropped her jacket, took the ball from Donnie DeCory, and ran a lap around the court, dribbling expertly and fast. And the audience began to cheer and applaud. She sprinted up to the basket, went up in the air and laid the ball through the hoop, with the fans cheering very loudly now. And of course, Pine Ridge went on to win the game. The person who transmitted this story said that he couldn't find evidence of a single act as elegant, as generous, or as transcendent as Sue Ann's dance at center court in the gym at Lead. And I agree. That was Sue Ann's Lion's Roar. And a poem from Hafiz called The Sun Never Says. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look at what happens with a love like that. It lights up the whole sky. There's a fullness of energy and a confident way to walk our human path when the feeling of loving kindness is strong. And the Buddha called this tremendous fullness of energy the lion's roar. He said that when he himself spoke, it was like the lion's roar in the jungle, because the power behind his words was born out of loving care and great compassion. The real results of practice sometimes come as a surprise. You encounter a difficult situation and do what seems to become natural, that seems to come just naturally. And then, after the fact, you realize that you handled the situation very differently from the way you used to. The natural expression, effortless expression of a clearly focused mindful awareness, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity is the true result. At the time, what you do seems perfectly natural. It's really no big deal, you might say to a friend who asks how you were able to stay present and so easily do what needed to be done. But it is a big deal because the natural expression of these qualities changes your life and changes the lives of everyone you encounter. So, closing this evening's Dhamma reflection with a poem by Mary Oliver. It's an excerpt from a poem by Mary Oliver called To Begin With the Sweet Grass. What I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself. Never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. That was many years ago. Since then, I have gone out from my confinements, through with difficulty. I mean, the ones that thought to rule my heart, I cast them out. I put them on the mush pile. They will be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow or other. And I have become the child of the clouds and of hope. I have become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I have become older, and cherishing what I have learned, I have become younger. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself. Then forget it. Then love the world. And let's sit together silently just for a moment or two. May all of the wholesome energies and the fruits that manifest through our practice serve with immeasurable impartiality, without bias, without prejudice, towards the welfare, the happiness, and the awakening of all beings everywhere.